Hello, and welcome to Utopian and Dystopian Fictions, a podcast hosted by me, Matt Leggett, a senior lecturer at the University of Winchester, where I teach utopian and dystopian fiction.
And me, Liam Knight, an independent scholar with a PhD in English literature from the University of Birmingham.
In this podcast, we interview scholars, thinkers, and writers from different disciplines, inviting them to discuss what interests them about utopias, dystopias, and speculative fiction.
Whether you're a student, scholar, or someone looking for reading recommendations, we hope you enjoy listening along. If you do, please let us know by rating and following the podcast wherever you are listening, leaving us a comment, or dropping us an email on utopiananddystopianfictions@gmail.com. So then, Matt, who did you speak to this time round?
Well, Liam, I had the privilege of interviewing Daniel Olivas, who is someone who has been a supporter of the podcast for some time. So it's really great to finally meet him. Really lovely guy, another guest dealing with time differences. In fact, when we were trying to organize the interview, Daniel lives in California. I originally said that I could do 8 a.m. his time, which is obviously early evening for me, but the earlier the better. And it was his desire, not mine, I would add, to start at 7 a.m.
Whoa.
Now, I don't know about you, Liam, but I'm no good for much at 7 a.m., let alone sitting down for a podcast interview. So a big thank you to him. But on a more serious note, it ties into a little bit about Daniel's life because after the recording, he was heading off to work. So while Daniel is a published author of fiction, works fiction and other works as well, he's published 13 books, so he's doing pretty well on that front. By day, he's a lawyer and in fact has been Deputy Attorney General working in the California Department of Justice. So he knows his stuff. Anyway, we started out talking about his fiction more broadly. And one idea that comes across strongly is Daniel's efforts to foreground stories where the characters look and sound like him and his friends and family. So Daniel is the grandson rather of Mexican immigrants, and like many in California, of course, feels a strong connection to his Mexican heritage. And this is quite evident from the titles of recent works like Chicano Frankenstein, his 2024 novel, about which we talked in quite some detail in the interview, but also things like his play Waiting for Godinez and his upcoming work as well, Chicano Werewolf. So where this is particularly interesting is the intersections, I think, between his work as a lawyer around the environment, land use and affordable housing, and his obvious investment in interests around immigration and forms of speculative fiction. Although, as we discuss, his fiction is varied and at times that sort of speculative backdrop is more subordinate, if you like, to the intimate stories of family and personal relationships that he likes to tell. So when we got to the discussion of Chicano Frankenstein, which is a really interesting novel, by the way, I commend it to our audience. I read it recently. Daniel gave us a brief outline and a short reading from the novel. And the novel's setting is broadly dystopian, so I won't go into it too much here because obviously, I'm treading on the interview, but briefly, it imagines a future where it's possible to reanimate the dead who essentially come back with wiped memories in order to service the economy. So in a country with an aging population, reanimation is regarded as the solution to a labor shortage and primarily a solution that avoids the need for immigration. So from this, you can probably already sense that these reanimated workers become stand-ins for migrants who are stripped of their identity and exploited, even as they also become victims of hateful public and political rhetoric. What you don't necessarily get from this description, however, is just how intimate the writing is. And Daniel really brings his characters to life and makes us feel for these people. So the reanimated protagonist is suitably unnamed, but he certainly comes to feel like a real person to the reader. And I think that's really Daniel's sort of central point. These are real people with real lives, as much as they're often treated as a statistic or as a kind of flat caricature to be abused by politicians and the media. From there, I don't really want to spoil the discussion, but just to capture that a great deal of it revolved around the parallels in the book between the way in which reanimated workers are treated under the dystopian conditions that the book imagines, and migrant workers are treated in our present world in both the US and indeed in Europe too. So it's a kind of near dystopia, I would say, rather than a sort of really speculative one. But it's worth noting as well that the metaphor can be extended to any marginalized group. It doesn't have to be, about immigrants. We did also talk about the role played by the media in holding politicians to account, briefly touched on the post-truth nature of sort of present-day politics. And we also sort of talked a bit about the idea of kind of retellings. So the novel is obviously a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but at least in my reading of it, it's I think a really true tribute to Shelley's original story, because it's really about, as Shelley's novel is, it's about humanizing the monster, or something that is perceived of as a monster in society. So, I thought it was a really fitting tribute to Shelley's work.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate yourself and Daniel taking the time to catch up and to talk about Chicano Frankenstein and sort of some of the topics that you guys discussed that you've just sort of mentioned. I thought it was really interesting to hear his viewpoint as this person with almost like a dual perspective. He's I think he jokes he's a lawyer by day, and by night he's a writer. He's sort of sounding like Batman there or something. I think what was really interesting for me was this discussion of sort of the intimate, the everyday, the deeply personal in this sort of dystopian setting, this dystopian backdrop. I know it's something that you and I have sort of spoke about a bit off camera and around the interview as well. Is there anything more that you wanted to sort of touch upon there regarding sort of dystopias with this more intimate, personal, quotidian, everyday, whatever sort of perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that adds a great deal, in fact. And one of the novels that sort of sprung to my mind, and it's a really, I think that Chicano Frankenstein, like in my head at least, sort of made a bunch of connections to other dystopian texts, but it also felt very different to them. So it wasn't like this is like that text. In many ways, it's absolutely nothing like the text I'm going to talk about. But there was something about the style or whatever that just made me think about it. And one of those kind of novels is one I know that you personally really like. And you were the one that told me to read it in the first place. And this is Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. And I teach that. I've actually only taught it a couple of weeks ago now on the utopian dystopian fiction module, and I think it's a wonderful novel. But what makes it wonderful is that intimate writing style. So I'm always struck by the fact that its original Japanese name was something like Secret Crystallization or something like that.
Yeah.
And the publisher thought, right, well, we're going to call it The Memory Police because that sounds like George Orwell. I thought, please, so I'm going to sell it as this sort of great sort of modern dystopian novel in the vein of kind of 1984. And I can sort of see why they did that. And there is an Orwellian strand to that novel, but really it's just not like that at all. And I kind of feel like that missells the novel and also undervalues it a little bit. Because of course, as much as Orwell's novel is great, I don't think, in terms of its style, it isn't emotionally affecting in the way that Ogawa's novel is, which I kind of feel as a novel just really leaves a kind of lasting impact. It's about fundamentally what it means to be human. It's about what foregrounds the ways in which we make meaning from our existence, especially when that existence is disappearing, like right before our eyes, in a sense. So I kind of felt a bit like that with Chicano Frankenstein, in that it felt like the real power of the novel didn't come at all from the dystopian setting or dystopian ideas, but from the intimate writing style, which connects us to these kind of characters. And weirdly, I mean, in The Memory Police, in some senses, like the writing actually isn't that intimate. It's actually kind of at a distance. But there are other ways in which we feel like deeply emotionally affected by that novel. And I'm guessing you did as well, because you are a big fan of it.
Yes, no, it's probably one of my top 3 novels of all time, perhaps. I think there's something very like tender about The Memory Police. It's a novel that the ending of it, I think, really deeply moved me, without giving too much away. I thought it was one of the most beautiful endings for a piece of fiction that I've encountered for a long, long time. And it sounds like maybe there's a similarity there with Chicano Frankenstein, insofar as, it is deeply personal, as without giving too much away, as yourself and Daniel discuss. Sort of the main thrust of the novel is a love story ultimately, and actually the dystopian backdrop is present in sort of alternate chapters, I think, isn't it? With the sort of the documents, the endotexts, perhaps, if I'm going to throw my word out there, that sort of create this bigger picture, this greater sort of pastiche or assembly of just world building and information that conveys that there is a greater concern going on here. We've got that real mix of political tension, and as you say, sort of the reanimated workers are clearly standing for immigrants, but as yourself and Daniel discussed, they essentially stand in for any marginalised group. So there's that much bigger sort of political concern going on. But again, I think Daniel, sort of suggests in the interview, and you're in agreement with him, that by having this real tender, intimate style and this sort of really deeply personal story, it humanizes a group of people who are othered in this story world, but their real world counterparts are likely, well, consistently othered, especially in political rhetoric.
Yeah, I think that's why he's using that story of Frankenstein. Frankenstein does that at its heart, and there are quite a lot of other similar sort of retellings out there. I think Frankenstein's going having a bit of a moment culturally. I don't necessarily know why, but I don't know if you've seen or read any other kind of adaptations. I relatively recently read Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi, and in that's a really interesting kind of concept as well. So the monster is made of body parts stitched together from those who've been basically killed in the Iraq War, and he becomes a kind of avenging angel in some respects, but also kind of he's feared as well as sort of revered in some capacity. I didn't mind the novel. I don't think it quite delivered for me what the kind of premise promised, if you like, but it was interesting. But yeah, and then of course you got Guillermo del Toro's recent retelling of Frankenstein. Daniel mentions another one actually in the interview, which I haven't yet got round to, but sounds interesting. But I don't know why Frankenstein now, but maybe it has to do with that idea of kind of the other or the outcast in some capacity. I don't know.
Well, just The Bride, directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, has just come out this month as well. It's being panned, I think, critically, but all the same, like there seems to be this Frankenstein renaissance almost. And I wonder if there's something in that, and this is me sort of riffing off something Daniel says, but Frankenstein's creature or Frankenstein's monster is if I say problem, I'm going to say it in air quotes, but he's a problem of Dr. Frankenstein's creation. He's I suppose in a sense he's artificial, right? He is constructed, and the issue between the Doctor and the creature is almost artificial insofar as because the creature was constructed. But I wonder again if there's this this preoccupation with rejection, who we're rejecting, why we're rejecting them, what it says about our own anxieties and concerns. And again, I haven't seen the Del Toro nor The Bride, the most recent one that I'm aware of. But again, I wonder if there's we're in a landscape that is politically, it seems incredibly divisive. I mean, isn't it always? But it seems increasingly so at the moment, and so I wonder if we've just got this increased sort of cultural awareness that there are people, there are things, there are concepts that we are othering, that we are rejecting. But like the othering is in itself like fake. You know, it's made up. You know, if we're thinking about it with regards to, you know, how we other or reject immigrants, or you know, people of different faiths, or people from different nations, or people of different sexualities, and so on. Ultimately, people are people, right? Like it sounds quite twee for me to say on the podcast, but you know, if you cut us, we all bleed red. You know, like there's, we're all fundamentally human, and this dehumanizing, this othering, is arbitrary, it's fake, it's nonsense, and it's done with ulterior motives in mind, I suppose. You know, we see, you know, I know Daniel spoke about some of Trump's quite dangerous rhetoric against sort of Mexicans, for example. But you know, he's espoused so much xenophobic rhetoric. You know, he you know, obviously had his famous quote about Haiti in the last few months as well. And you know, given the current political climate that we are living in right now, with sort of all manner of things happening in sort of the Gulf, it's all just nonsense that's made to just incite division. It ties into the fake news stuff that Daniel was referring to. You know, that was a big part of my thesis as well, fake news and post-truth and so on. And just, it's all just meant for, it's rage baiting, I suppose, to use an internet term, isn't it? It's you know, making people feel things so that they don't think much.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like the literary techniques that go on in order to try to address this, and there are other texts that sort of sprung to mind in relation to Daniel's novel, which are quite different in a lot of ways, but which deal with sort of anti-immigrant rhetoric in a really neat way, in the same way that his novel is doing, I think, which is that I don't know if you've read either Mohsin Hamid's novel Exit West or Sean Tan's wordless graphic novel, in fact, The Arrival. But those are two texts that I use to teach, I guess, you know, the migrant narrative. And I think they do so really effectively. So Exit West imagines a world in which overnight doors begin to open up, allowing people to just walk through directly into other countries. So it's the complete kind of dissolution of kind of physical borders and boundaries. And that sort of, you know, it's a kind of magical realist novel. It's more so than a kind of utopian or dystopian novel, but it does kind of sometimes sort of touch on those sort of dystopian sort of iconography, this sort of idea of kind of the chaos that is unleashed in that moment, but also there's kind of hopeful utopian opportunities. But it does so by focusing on the lives of two particular migrants who are from a war-torn country, who suddenly have this kind of opportunity to leave, if you like. So, you know, you have this layering where you've got the big overarching narrative, which, as you say, is kind of the big story about, you know, migrant statistics. And then you have, you know, the focal point of the novel is on the individual and fleshing out that individual, if you want, and really making them feel like one of us. And then the same really goes for Sean Tan's The Arrival, which, if you haven't come across it, is absolutely fascinating. So it charts the migrant's journey to a strange and foreign, vaguely utopian, actually, land, that's modeled on the kind of migrant journey to America during the early 1900s. But so we sort of see some of these images like the arrivals hall at Ellis Island, but it's been reconfigured to be this kind of fantastical place, and a place where all the language is kind of alien in some capacity. All of the animals, all of the things that the migrant encounters is just like an alien landscape to them, because that's what it's like if you go to another country and you don't speak the language, right? It is all new to you. It is all kind of, you know, the kind of food people are eating is all kind of different to you. So it feels like, it's a really neat way of estranging us as kind of readers, in the same way that the migrant is estranged when they come to this foreign land. And it sort of shows that, you know, you don't, people often have this idea that migrants are moving in order to take your jobs or whatever, or to exploit us in some way, rather than that they are actually fundamentally coming over, taking a big risk themselves, and doing something that you wouldn't do naturally. I just, unless I'm really forced to move to a country where I don't speak the language, I'm not going to do it. Right. So they're not coming over here as some sort of game to kind of, out of spite in some capacity. It's a really sort of dangerous journey that a lot of them go on as well. So, why are you putting yourself through that? It's not out of spite or malice. So I think these texts do a really wonderful job of humanizing these people that otherwise are getting a lot of flack from the media, from politicians. And that's how I felt about Chicano Frankenstein as well. It was sort of sat in that kind of category. It was very different narratively, story-wise, etc., to those texts I'm talking about. But it stylistically, it was sort of achieving the same effect through its style of writing and execution.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think definitely you've persuaded me that I do need to add it to my TBR pile. As sort of towering and teetering as that may be, I think we've done hopefully a good job at giving a flavour of the interview to come. But how about we pass over to yourself and to Daniel?
Absolutely, let's go. I'm delighted to have with me today. Can I call you a friend of the podcast, perhaps even? Daniel Olivas, all the way from California. Daniel, can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely, and thank you. I am a friend of the podcast, and I love your discussions of utopias and dystopias and how it intersects with literature. I am a Los Angeles-based writer, born and raised in LA, the grandson of Mexican immigrants. I have a degree in literature from Stanford University and my law degree from UCLA Law School. By day, I'm a government lawyer in California. I work for the state, and I specialize in environmental enforcement, land use, and affordable housing. By night, I am a fiction writer, poet, and playwright and book critic. I've had 13 books published, and I've edited 2 anthologies. And my most recent novel is Chicano Frankenstein, published by Forest Avenue Press out of Portland, Oregon, a wonderful independent press. I think that's pretty much it. I'm married to my law school sweetheart, and we have a son who's 35, who is in the video game industry. He's a brilliant young man who does things with computers and video games that I just don't understand, but it's a wonderful thing that he's doing in terms of telling stories and filling our life with interesting things. So.
And the whole writer by night makes it sound like you're Batman as well, particularly with such an impressive resume. I mean, you've mentioned, Daniel, that your legal career already. You mentioned obviously that you're an author, and we will talk about your book, your most recent book, Chicano Frankenstein, a little bit later, as I've got a copy of it right next to me, and I've read it and really enjoyed it. But yeah, you're specifically an author of dystopian speculative fictions. And I wondered, if there's a kind of link there. Can you talk a little bit about your background, how your perhaps professional influences have shaped the things that you write about, and perhaps how you write about them as well?
Absolutely, and I do want to make one correction. I don't think I specialize in dystopian fictions. I have written dystopian fictions. Actually, my very first book, which is now out of print, a novella called The Courtship of Maria Rivera Peña, is a simple love story about Mexican immigrants coming to Los Angeles in the 1920s. And so the intersection between my work and my creative writing is perhaps tenuous. By day, as you note, I am a government lawyer in an arena that does get intruded by our federal government, let's put it that way, with respect to the environment and with respect to farm worker housing, within California. As a creative writer, what I try to do is, number one, tell a good story. If I'm not telling a story that's compelling, if I'm not creating characters who are three-dimensional, if I'm not creating characters that you as a reader care about, then I'm not much of a writer. So when I'm writing a short story or a novel or a play, I'm trying to, number one, tell a good story with believable characters. Number two, I try to center people who look like me and my family and my community in a way that they're not were not centered in the literature I studied when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. Yes, I read wonderful writers and got exposed to wonderful writers from my father, who in particular had wanted to be a writer but never got published. He gave me at a very early age, fourth and fifth and sixth grade, books by James Joyce and Somerset Maugham, um, um, Willa Cather, Mark Twain, and of course Cervantes. I read Don Quixote at a very young age, I think about fifth grade, in English. And so when I write, I try to tell stories, whether it's social realism or using magical realism or dystopian fiction. I'm really just trying to tell a good story and also try to let the reader learn about people who maybe they don't know that much about, or perhaps look a lot like their uncle or aunt or grandmother or brother or themselves. And that's been one of the beauties of having my books taught in colleges when I get invited to talk to students, particularly students who are first generation college, whose parents speak Spanish as a first language, who are immigrants. When I talk to the students, there's this joy that is expressed about reading stories where the people are recognizable, um, and talk like them, and have the same kind of concerns and worries that they have. So it's a very long-winded response to your question.
No, but I think you've kind of already hit upon one of the things I found most interesting about the novel that I read, which is the kind of combination of dystopian fiction and quite intimate writing, which I thought was really striking and perhaps a little bit unusual. I think I'm gonna, yeah, I think I might come to that in a minute because I think we should probably introduce your novel first. So I picked it up at the beginning of the year and really enjoyed it. So I think when we've had authors on the podcast previously, I just read the book. They'd sent it out to me and I just read it. Whereas this I picked up a few months ago now. So I'm having to reach back into my memory. So maybe you can refresh me, Daniel. What would you say the novel is about? And have you got maybe a short passage or section you could read that you think best sums up the work?
Sure. So the novel takes place in the near future in Pasadena, California, primarily. And it's in a future where reanimation has become standard practice and acceptable throughout the world. In the United States, we have 12 million reanimated people. And the way it works is that people can sign a donor card and agree to be reanimated if they're suddenly killed or die. And yeah, part of the agreement is that when you're reanimated, you are your identity basically is wiped. Your history is wiped, other than your skill set. So that you also go through plastic surgery, so your face is changed, your fingerprints are removed, and the DNA companies are not allowed to analyze your DNA, and those records are removed. So then you are put it back into the workforce as a clean slate, as a tabula rasa, as basically repurposed people. And the reason why this is needed is because the birth rate in the United States and in other parts of the world has declined. And uh, I focus primarily on one unnamed man throughout the novel. We don't know what his name is. Of course, people interacting with him know what his name is. And this unnamed man we follow as he begins to fall in love with a woman who's a lawyer. He himself is a paralegal. He's a brown-skinned man, and he has one arm that is white and larger than his right arm, and his left leg is also white. He's been stitched together after a horrible car accident and reanimated. Um, People who do not like the reanimated call them stitchers. That's the hateful term used for them. And then within the novel, there is um, a right-wing president named Mary Beth Cadwallader, who is trying to drum up her midterm numbers, so she's not too much of a lame duck, and she wants to make America safe again. And so there are chapters that are transcripts and other and letters and different things that show that side of the story. So the novel is running on two different tracks. It's a micro and macro. The micro is focusing primarily on this one man, on his journey as he tries to understand who he was, as well as his intersection with, at some point in the novel, with the man who reanimated him, who is in fact the Chicano Frankenstein, as we all know, and it's a running joke within the novel. As we all know, Frankenstein is not the monster, but the doctor who who reanimated the creature or monster, as some people may say. So that's the basic premise of the novel. And in terms of reading a short passage, let me read this. It's about a page, um, where the man has um, spent the evening, the night with Faustina, the woman he's falling in love with. Here goes. The man sat up. He breathed heavily, and a cold sheen of perspiration covered his body. The man looked upon Faustina, sleeping on her side, facing him, curled into a ball like a cat, and snoring, face half buried in the man's pillow. The sheet had fallen to the floor, and the soft amber light of the corner lamp bathed Faustina's body in a gentle glow. The man softly touched Faustina's skin at her left shoulder and then at her hip, perfectly joined, not a line of rippled scar, tissue, simply beautiful brown skin running seamlessly along the contours of her limbs. His breathing slowed and he calmed from the delirium of the nightmare. The man sighed, stood, and walked into the bathroom. He closed the door and turned on the light. He looked in the mirror and considered the differences between Faustina's body and his own. The man slowly ran his fingers across the scar tissue where his left hip and leg joined. A fairly good match of skin color and even foot size. His own foot takes a size 9 medium shoe, but the man could comfortably walk about wearing a 9.5, the size of the foot on his new leg. The man then ran his fingers along the scars where his left arm had been joined at the shoulder. His own right arm and shoulder were, of course, perfect together, but the left. The jarring line of color looked like a children's wooden jigsaw puzzle of the United States, with each state a different color from its neighbor. Couldn't they have found skin that was closer in hue? The brown of his left shoulder stood out against the white of the arm, and his left hand was so much larger than his right. A shocking mismatch. Why? Was it some kind of cruel joke? Did the surgeons and nurses laugh and offer sniggering jibes about the man's patchwork body parts? How could anyone be so cruel as to deny him the modest gift of conformity? that inner peace that springs from ordinariness, an opportunity to simply be only himself and not contain many. He didn't seem to belong anywhere, neither here nor there.
Wonderful. I didn't know what you were going to pick, but I think what you picked there is particularly illustrative of the next point that I wanted to make, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about the style of the novel. So you've already mentioned, you gave me there a really good breakdown of the kind of the plot, I suppose, of the text, and you mentioned the sort of, I would guess, overtly satirical passages, right? You make America safe again. You don't have to look too far to sort of see what ideologies, what particular individuals, people you're kind of skewering here. But by contrast, just as the passage demonstrates that you picked, those passages where you're writing about the protagonist and his relationship or his developing relationship, they're really quite subtle and intimate. And I thought that was what particularly stood out for me about this text. And I wondered if that contrast is deliberate on your part and what you're hoping it achieves.
Most of my fiction tends to be very up close and personal, whether it's a short story or my prior short novels. My poetry is very similar. It tends to be very personal. When I decided to write this, I was inspired by the anti-immigrant rhetoric of the 2022 midterm elections in the United States. It was not a presidential year, but it was the off-term elections. And I found that the anti-immigrant rhetoric was just yet again very, very virulent and cruel. So when I decided to address that in literature, I decided to go big, to go for a novel. I had previously written a play just a couple years before, inspired by the same rhetoric, but then that was the Trumpian rhetoric. Trump was not in office in 2022. So what I did was I decided to turn to Mary Shelley's iconic novel, Frankenstein, because in the United States, the boogeyman, that immigrant, really is a creature of the United States. The United States needs workers. If you remove every undocumented immigrant from the United States, about 5 industries would collapse, whether it be farming or construction, or hospitality, whatever it might be, restaurants. And because the United States has this hunger to keep on growing and be an economic superpower, yet the population is aging and not reproducing at a former rate, immigrants have to do that work. You have to turn someplace. And so in my novel, the United States has literally created a whole workforce from dead people. Yet there's this whole movement to attack and remove the rights from the reanimated because they're not American. They're not really American. They're not really one of us. And so I thought that the elements that were macro, the political part of the my novel, I thought I can go for satire, and then balance it with the intimate look at the main character. I also visualized my novel as a movie or television series as I wrote it. I specifically wrote scenes that were cinematic. There are scenes where he's running. He runs every night or morning, and where he's alone with his body. And I envisioned those scenes as sequences within a film. In fact, the novel, it's public record, and so I can say this. The novel has been optioned by Universal Television. The copyright record of that option is a public record, so I can say that. I don't want to say anything else about the development of that of my novel as a series, and there may be some news hopefully coming soon. But I think that in creating this novel, more than any other thing I've written, I viewed it as a movie, how it would play as a movie or television series. It was, of course, also inspired by the great James Whale, 1931 Frankenstein movie, which is very different, of course, from the novel. But I rewatched that film, a film that I watched that I'd first seen when I was about 5 years old, and I wanted to kind of play against some of the elements of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, lots to get stuck into there, and I'm hoping this does materialize as a TV show. I think it would be great. I'd be definitely keen to watch it. But I think one of the things you're getting there is, at there as well is it's I think one of the things that the novel captured particularly was the kind of contradictory nature of certain ideological positions that people take, right? So and I've got a quote or two here, but right near the beginning of the book, you write that, quote, anti-immigrant groups were divided on the issue because the creation of a reanimated population could eventually diminish employers' reliance on and hunger for low wage foreign workers, which is exactly kind of what you're saying. However, those same groups complained that stitchers were not real Americans and could replace native born US residents in the near future if reanimation ramped up. So, here's the fundamental problem, really, isn't it? There's a desire for cheap goods and services that requires an immigrant, workforce, but that, a workforce that we have to acknowledge is exploited, really, is doing the jobs we don't want to do for wages we don't kind of accept as good wages in a country with an aging population. So, yeah, I thought that was something that you capture well through that kind of combination of kind of satire and the kind of intimate. Is a way of sort of dramatizing almost the contradictory nature of that relationship.
Well, we
But
see this,
yeah,
and we see this in Europe as well. I mean, and I know when my wife and I traveled in Spain a few years ago, this backlash against Asian immigrants coming in to take jobs that other folks won't take. And there was a movement, as we were explained by one taxi cab driver who was from Central America, that there was a movement within Spain to attract Central American workers and Mexican workers because at least they spoke the language, and at least, even though they had indigenous blood and they were mixed, they weren't pure Spanish, at least they would be able to blend in better. I don't know if I have not done research, if that's necessarily true. I wouldn't be shocked if it's true. Just knowing human nature and knowing how people react. In our own country, there was a news article where the president was encouraging American women to have babies, and because of the aging population. And obviously, his view is that by quote unquote real Americans having babies, you can offset the need for foreign workers. And I if I have this correct, I need to take a look at the news article. I think he actually suggested that there be money paid to people for having kids, um, which is by itself kind of dystopian. It's a very strange concept.
we've got absolutely the same things going on over here, Daniel. I mean, you can change the names of the politicians, but yeah, the same points are being made here in the discourse, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I wondered, in Chicano Frankenstein, the reanimated workers, obviously, as we've sort of indicated, are analogous for the immigrant working population. But I wondered also if when you were writing them, you were conscious that they might also be or become metaphors for other marginalized groups. Is the metaphor applicable in other ways?
I would say yes, and it can be applicable to anyone who does not fit the paradigm of what a real male or female American is. For example, we have an attack on LGBTQ rights in the United States, attacks on um, the transgender community the United States, with right-wing politicians arguing that there's only, you know, two sexes, period, male, female. There's nothing in between, even though we know that's not true, across humanity and across the animal kingdom. And so this could be used as a metaphor really for any attacks on a marginalized group. It could be a religious group, it could be an ethnic group, it could be really any kind of group of people. In the novel, there's a discussion with the vice president as the president is beginning to hatch ideas to further marginalize the reanimated population. And some of what is discussed was done in the United States, specifically the rounding up of Japanese Americans during World War II, and putting them into camps, the taking of their property. And allegedly because they were a threat to national security. And as I understand it, Italian Americans and German Americans were not rounded up. It was the Japanese Americans because they didn't look American. I know people whose families lost everything, lost their properties, lost their homes, lost their in California. A lot of Japanese had nurseries. You know, they lost their livelihood, just taken away. In fact, there is a within my own family. I'll have to get the facts straight with my mom, but there was a family member who married a Japanese man. I think I have the gender right. And when the roundup happened, our family member was given a choice. You can stay out because you're not Japanese, you're Mexican American, or you can go into the camp. And of course, the family member went into the camp because you're not going to be separated from your spouse. Can you imagine given that choice? If your wife was taken to a camp and you have a child and you're told you can stay out with your child or you can go into camp and with your child and be with your wife. Can you imagine that kind of choice? I mean, the kind of cruelty that this country has visited upon certain people. You know, the family separation program of the Trump administration was intended to be cruel. It was created in order to cause terror, because basically the message was, if if you're undocumented, you can have your kids taken away from you. You can be sent back to your country, and your kids will stay in the United States. Can you imagine your child be taken from you?
I mean, I think, thinking about the way in which this is sort of framed in the novel, there are this sort of goes back to the transcripts, right, from the Oval Office meetings, because I think one of the things that struck me about this is you have these meetings between the president and her aides, and you have press briefings, television commercials, a bunch of stuff, but we don't really get the sense that there's any kind of morality here. That really it's all just kind of political strategy. There's not really anything approaching ethics here. So is that, do you think that's just like that's the political reality of the day, or that's what it takes to get into office? Is the problem deeper than particular political parties, or what's going wrong there, do you think?
I think it's not something new that the desire for power at all costs is something that some certain politicians will live by. And I think we've seen it in very strong terms in the United States in recent years, where politicians who normally would be considered mainstream have completely sold their souls to the current president and have allowed him to do things that, if he had been a Democrat, they would have been in the street screaming that you can't do this, you can't do that to the Constitution, you can't you can't tear apart normal political processes. Um, but they desperately want to stay in office. They don't want to be quote unquote primaried. In the United States, we have a primary system where people run for their party's candidacy for the general election. And if someone goes against Trump, Trump will quote unquote primary them. He will run and back a candidate to run against them in the primary. And he knows he has that kind of power. And so we have politicians um, who are rather crass in their desire to stay in power. And you may have noticed that the Republican politicians who are willing to speak out against Trump are the ones who aren't running for re-election. We see this happening in hearings where they're being very, very strong in terms of how they are challenging Trump, but they're not running for re-election. So, they have nothing. In the end, they have nothing to lose. I'm glad they're doing it, but it's sort of like, why didn't you do that earlier?
Yeah. I mean, it again, one of the things that uh, sort of comes out of that as well is this sort of sense that it's not just a political problem as well. I mean, I think it's a problem with the media, right? I mean, certainly in the novel, I thought there's a sort of sense of wish fulfillment at one point when you've got about halfway through. There's a fictitious interview between Anderson Cooper and the president that made me laugh anyway. And it's as if someone, I think, handed Cooper like all the questions that have been, maybe I don't know, maybe have been animating you particularly for the last however many years, and the questions that anyone who's, I suppose, a sane passive observer would want to ask the president. But it strikes me that these are the sorts of questions that never get asked of sitting politicians anymore, right? And not even just in the US. I often sort of watch sort of news items in the UK and think, why is no one asking these questions? Or these questions seem really obvious to me, and they, why are you asking this other set? So I don't know, why is the media unable to hold politicians properly to account anymore? I don't know.
Well,
Maybe that's a question you can't answer. I don't know.
I
I don't know.
well, the startling thing to me is as you watch those questions, good questions being asked during press conferences, and whether it's the president's press secretary or any member of his cabinet, they immediately turn it around and they'll say, "Oh, see, that's questions from CNN. You're the worst network. You lie." And in fact, Trump says things like that. Oh, you're the worst. You're a bunch of idiots. And just turns it into a very personal attack and flips it and never answers the question. So it in the old days, if you watch press conferences with Republicans, say Richard Nixon, who, I look back now at Watergate. Watergate seems so simple and so kind of, and Nixon had enough um, uh, personal integrity, even though he had done some horrible things. Uh, he had enough personal integrity to resign when he, when the Watergate scandal where we understood what happened and we had the evidence as to what happened with the cover up of the break-in of the Watergate Hotel. So um, I think there are really excellent reporters out there who try, but their questions are never answered. They're not answered. They're just insulted, and it almost feels like we've reached a post-truth kind of world. It is Orwellian, to go to another writer. Um, you know, it's distressing to me also that um, so many people get their news from TikTok and from social media as opposed to what my wife and I do. We get the LA Times, we get the physical newspaper, we read it in the morning. We also read other newspapers online, but we are not getting our news, fed to us and digested through something like TikTok. I think that's a problem.
I,
It's too
I
much.
don't
It's
want to.
almost too much, man.
I don't want to give the impression that this book is, is going to be sort of draining in any way or energy
No, it's
sapping.
funny.
Actually,
It's a
because
funny book.
it's a funny, it's funny. There's satire, and the satire makes you laugh. But
Yeah.
actually, I wanted to go back as well. There's lots about this book that isn't overtly political. And one of the things I thought reading it was particularly neat was it defied my expectations, at least, because I've grown quite accustomed to reading dystopian thrillers, not necessarily intentionally, but it seems to me to be the dominant form of dystopian writing these days, right? That there are these novels that are published, quite a lot of them, which have a really great premise, and then the writer proceeds to use this kind of premise as a backdrop to tell essentially a complete different story, a sort of page turning story about what one character's sort of heroic resistance, or a group of characters' heroic resistance. And I often find that sort of a little bit clunky. But when I sort of read the premise for your novel, I think that's kind of what I was expecting, another novel like that, because because that sort of political backdrop sort of sounds like it's going to be about that. And the idea is great, it's reanimated workforce that you already talked about. But I think what you do with it is more important, and partly because it's really understated. That it's a novel that's, at least when I was reading it, felt more like it was about relatable existence in some way. The rest of the world kind of carries on as if not much has changed. I think sometimes, like, dystopian fiction can be a sort of, what if it sort of extrapolates that and imagines the entire of society transformed by one particular technology, whereas actually, I think what you sort of grapple with here is that most, a transformative technology does appear, but most things carry on as they are. So because there are fundamental things about us being human, ultimately this does challenge ideas about mortality, but the same things matter to people, their job security, what things are in the shops, how much they cost, their sense of identity, their vote,
Hmm.
and I think what you've done is, in that sense, is like a really pure adaptation of Shelley's novel, because what Shelley's trying to do is, in some way, humanize the monster. And I think
Hmm.
that's ultimately what I'm putting words in your mouth here, but that's how I felt like that was what you were doing. You were really sort of all about kind of humanization and bringing things back down to earth, so that we're reminded that the immigrant is really just like us, or is us
Hmm.
in some way. Um,
Right. When you read Shelley's novel, you do feel sympathy for the creature because the creature is rejected by basically his parents in the body of Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein had the hubris to be both mother and father and create uh, life, if you will. In my novel, the true the true Dr. Frankenstein is not necessarily this one particular Chicano doctor who has now lost his job as a reanimating doctor because his profession has been outlawed. But in a sense, in the novel, society, United States or the world society of business, is the true Dr. Frankenstein that has created this reanimated population and then starts to reject it. And but unlike the Shelley novel, where the creature goes into a murderous rage and bodies start to pile up, um, my reanimated character, my main character, he's just a man who is just falling in love and beginning to learn about himself and trying to navigate work and life. And he jogs every day, and he, he's just like us, as we try to get through life, and we try to get meaning out of life. And the older I get, and the more I see loved ones pass. Um, that whole idea of what does all this mean gets stronger and stronger. Um, you know, uh, I have the luxury because I went to law school to be able to have a day job that is very meaningful. and very intellectually fulfilling. And I work with wonderful people and work on some really interesting cases that frankly affect a lot of people. I can open up the LA Times and read in the paper every day an article that is directly related to the work my office does. So I'm very blessed in that way. But we can draw, as my late father would say, you can get meaning from very simple things. Just being a good parent, treating people well, paying your taxes, and not hurting other people, um, you know uh, he would say things like people who dig ditches and do that honestly is as good as anyone else, and never look down on someone who is doing that, because you need that person as much as you need a lawyer or an accountant or anyone else, and those people are all part of the fabric of our society. And That's one of the things that my parents, in their, I think, in their wisdom, put into our minds, that everyone has value. And so in my novel, I'm trying to express that everyone has value, and that by being up close and personal to my main character, um, my hope is that readers appreciate that character and see maybe themselves in that character, and then by doing that, empathize with the destructive anti uh, Stitcher politics that is occurring within the world of my novel. Someone told me that um, if this is turned into a television show, um, that it would play well in blue states, but maybe reach the hearts of people in red states. And I would hope that as a writer, that if my novel could do that, then that's icing on the cake. That's beyond anything I could ever expect.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it sort of the effectiveness of the novel and the effectiveness, I suppose, of its kind of final statement about its politics and the direction of that politics rests on, how much you like these people, how much you care for them, right? So
Right.
I mean, I don't know if if this is too much of a spoiler or not, but the kind of logic of it is that, well, actually, if Stitchers couldn't vote, then you'd be able to win the election easily. So, and I, I've seen this concern about voting tactics recently. Of course, you've sort of lots of talking about gerrymandering, but beyond that, the sort of maybe the dilution of immigrant votes in some way. I've just finished reading Gary Steingart's novel Vera or Faith. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It was published last year. Plays with a similar idea of where there's sort of voting rights for immigrants are degraded. I don't know if with your legal background in mind, maybe you can tell us whether we should take that sort of possibility seriously or not.
Absolutely. We see that Trump wants to federalize all elections, and states are supposed to be in charge under Constitution, in charge of elections. And so by federalizing, he's already talked about concerns about Chinese involvement and undermining our elections. That China somehow is trying to rig our elections. And so there's a very strong fear within the United States that he will target certain states during the midterm elections to um, prevent the honest counting of all votes, because he does not want to be a lame duck. Um, there are also states that have been pushing laws to make it more difficult for people to prove that they have the right to vote through ID laws. And So it's a very real fear that we're seeing right now. And I know there are states gearing up for a big fight, because If he sends Homeland Security to polling places and issues some kind of executive order to have ballot boxes seized, then we're going to have a true constitutional crisis on our hands. And watch this space. I am certain we're going to be seeing legal fights with regard to voting during the midterm elections.
I mean, this also sort of speaks to some of your other writing as well, your non-fiction writing and your political writing. So I recently read a piece you sent me, Howling into the Wind, on 41 years of writing about the abuses of the immigration system. And in that, you contextualize the current US crackdown on immigration as part of a kind of, longer term project in a sense. Now, I kind of already sort of anticipating your response here. I've sort of, made a note here. Does it feel different this time around, or is it the same story with a different face? I mean, I think you're already hinting at the idea that this is different.
It is different. I'm going to use a little humorous analogy. It's sort of like that scene from This Is Spinal Tap. We're at 11 now.
Mm.
And I'll make that comment in honor of the late Rob Reiner, who was a brilliant director and writer himself, who created This Is Spinal Tap. It's 11. It is ramped up in such a way that is shocking to me because I was born in 1959 in Los Angeles, and I've seen the ebb and flow of civil rights. But typically it's two steps forward, one step back. It's a that kind of movement. We've gone so many steps backwards with this president, and it it is different. It is different. And I think there are people who are older than I, people who lived through World War II, who have expressed to me he resembles a Mussolini. He resembles a Hitler in terms of his approach to drumming up hatred. It is truly shocking. I mean, it's not as if we've had presidents in the United States in recent years who weren't bigots. I mean, there are tapes of Richard Nixon using anti-Semitic slurs and anti-Italian slurs. It has never in recent years, at least as far as I could tell, we haven't been confronted by a president who is just so blatantly, openly bigoted in the things he says. I mean, when he first ran for president, coming down that golden escalator, talking about Mexicans in some of the ugliest ways possible, using stereotypes, and then throwing in that phrase. But some of them, are might be good people, that type of thing. For someone like me to hear that, it's sort of like, what year are we?
It seems to me right now that politicians are almost falling over each other to sort of promise the most radical deportation measures, right? It seems funny to me that I think for us, this reads like dystopian fiction, but then for others, this is, what they've been kind of waiting to hear. This is sort of music to their ears.
What's interesting? It's and there's been press reports about this where the Republican farmers have been saying, we can't find people to work in our fields. I voted for you, Trump, but can you dial back some of this stuff? And there are also, Christian conservative ministers who have had undocumented people in their churches saying things like, these are just like normal people. These are part of our family, our religious family. They're afraid to come to church. They're afraid to go to, take their kids to school. Can you dial it back? So there are certainly people within the Republican Party who voted for Trump, but who also have had day-to-day dealings and relationships with, if you will, business or personal or religious, with this alleged threat of undocumented people who are speaking out, who are saying things. So I give them credit for saying something. I just wish that they had foreseen that this was going to happen.
Before we close, Daniel, I just wanted to return to your writing, and your process a little bit. So you've done Chicano Frankenstein, you've done Waiting for Godinez, which I don't think we mentioned, but that's the play I think you're referring to earlier.
Yes.
And you're currently, I believe, again, this is sort of social media interactions here. You're currently writing Chicana Werewolf, right? So, I mean, what's drawn you particularly to this process of sort of updating source material and myth in some way, or adding some sort of Chicano seasoning, I suppose, to this mix?
Well, retellings has the concept of a retelling has a deep has deep roots in literature and in drama and in film and television. Most of Shakespeare's plays are retellings of existing plays or poems or legends. So retellings can be a very powerful tool for writers to take a story that people think they know and are intimate with, but then to flip it on its head and to play against expectations. When I start to do a novel like Chicano Frankenstein, I'm playing against expectations, and I think I can use it to almost as a nice plump writing prompt, to create my own story. My
It's
play
the
wait
creative juices flowing.
Exactly. My play Waiting for Godinez, which I wrote in response to the first Trump election. Um, I felt that his anti-immigrant rhetoric was so absurd that I needed to address it in a absurd way. And of course, Waiting for Godot is like the Samuel Beckett's iconic absurdist play. I had never written a play before, so I taught myself how to write a play. Um, and I wrote it in 13 days. I wrote in the morning, I wrote after work, I wrote on weekends. And I started to submit to theaters, and eventually it developed. I had readings in LA, three different readings in theaters in LA, one in New York, and then we had a full production in Sacramento. And I wrote that play in order to humanize what happens when you tear apart families. Um, I don't know if people know Waiting for Godot. It's famously the play where nothing happens twice. Um, as Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for this mysterious person, Godot. It's this wonderful banter that goes back and forth that is absurd. In my play, I have a Mexican-American man and woman, and every night the man is snatched up by ice and thrown into a cage. And every night he escapes and comes back to be with his friend, Isabel, as they wait for a mysterious man named Godinez. Um, so retellings can be a very powerful tool. My new manuscript, Chicana Werewolf, um, is a retelling of the werewolf, really the werewolf movies, again, Universal. And the element of that manuscript is basically the government is doing experiments on Latinas in order to create the perfect soldier, and it goes awry. And my main character is a Chicana lawyer who uncovers this plot. But it's actually a funny novel, and my main character is a young lawyer who struggles with alcohol, and also sees the world through a noir lens. So, but she's looking at the world, and it's almost like a Hitchcock film. I make a lot of references to Hitchcock and to other noir films and noir novels. To such an extent that at the very end of my novel, I have a list of every film I mentioned in the book. So I'm trying to find a home for that. It's being read by a couple of publishers right now.
I'll be looking forward to that one. Although, I'm then going to expand my to be watched list as well, by the sounds of it. I also like the sound of Waiting for Godinez, which I have to check out. It sounds a little bit Kafkaesque, dare I say, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Actually, I have a short story that was in one of my short story collections called Franz Kafka in Fresno. So Kafka is one of my great literary influences. I love his writing.
Fabulous. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for joining us today, Daniel. And I'm very conscious that you've got to get off to work. So it's the end of Friday for me, and for you. We started at about 7 a.m., didn't we? So, but you promised me you were going to be fully caffeinated. But still, I'm impressed. And now you're going to go off and sit in the LA traffic. So. As a sign off, yeah, as you know, we always ask our guests to tell our audience of a text, could be novel, movie, piece of criticism, your own work excluded, although of course you should go out and check out Chicano Frankenstein and your other works. But yeah, something that you think everyone should read, something topical. Um, have you go.
Yes, yes. Actually, I'm going to recommend two books, one fiction, one nonfiction. The novel Unwieldy Creatures by Addie Tsai, Tsai. It's I've read this, and it's a remarkable novel. And from the back of the book, Unwieldy Creatures, a biracial, queer, gender swap retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, follows the story of three beings who all navigate life from the margins. And so Addie actually interviewed me for the Los Angeles Review of Books about Chicano Frankenstein. I had not read her book before I wrote my book. Her book came out, I think, a year or two before. And I've gotten to know Addie, and she's a wonderful writer. The nonfiction book is by Eileen Hunt. Eileen Hunt is a professor at the University of Notre Dame. And her book is titled Artificial Life After Frankenstein. And if you're someone who loves the intersection of science and literature and movies and television series, this is the book for you. She is a political scientist as well as an a scholar who has specialized in Mary Shelley, and not only does she talk about Frankenstein in this book, but also Mary Shelley's great dystopian novel, The Last Man, which a lot of people don't talk about. I've started to read that, and it's a remarkable book. So those are my two recommendations for your listeners.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel. And very on theme with the Frankenstein thread there. I'll have to check that out. And I'm also kind of interested in The Last Man, but maybe I'll tell you about that separately. I've got a sort of little project I'm working on behind the scenes. But yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much again for joining us. And I really hope your journey to work is free flowing and not full of the sort of joys of the sounds of horns in the morning. But yeah, thanks so much, Daniel, and have a great rest of your day.
Matt, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you to Daniel for joining us on the podcast, especially at such an early hour. I thought the chat that he and Matt shared about Chicano Frankenstein, immigration, and intimate writing in dystopian settings was absolutely fantastic. If you enjoyed this episode, you can let us know by rating and following the podcast, leaving a comment, or sending us an email on utopiananddystopianfictions@gmail.com. And of course, please don't forget to join us next time, where we will delve into some more utopian and dystopian fictions.